us. She's been a long-time board member of the Houston Storytellers Guild, and although she loves folk tales, she is slowly entering the world of personal narratives. Sally has done workshops before. She is one of the greatest advocates of storytelling in the state, as far as I'm concerned. She really has done a magnificent job in spelling storytelling in everybody's mind, and she's really done a wonderful job. I worked with Sally, and I think we're in for a real treat. So here is Sally Goodroe with the power of imagery.
Thank you so much, Hank. I want to say thank you to a lot of people. First of all, thank you all for coming. And I want to say thank you to the people that are helping put this workshop together. Hank, Dean Keith, who's doing the technological stuff that I don't understand at all, and Michael Grundy, who is going to watch the chat for us and let us know if there are any questions showing up there. I will stop periodically and see if there are questions, and also if any of you sees anybody going like this, just let me know. I also want to make sure that everybody here brought paper and pencil. If you haven't, this is now the time to grab it, because we're going to work. We're going to do some stuff. So I want to make sure you have a good amount of paper and something to write with. So good. Okay, I'm seeing some nodding heads, so that's good. I also have to apologize because I'm looking over like this because my notes are all over here. So I have to have notes. So anyway, I also want to thank TSA for letting me do this. I think it's a great honor and privilege to be one of the mastering storytelling presenters. So I think this is a great series, and I've attended all of them, except I got to see Hank's on YouTube. So, all right. So tonight we're going to talk about imagery, and our goal is to improve our ability to gather and share images in order to create images that resonate in our listeners' imagination. So that is how we, when we're talking about that triangle between the teller, the story, and the listener, that is how we make that connection, one of the ways that we make that connection. So tonight we will talk about why we want to create sensory and, by extension, emotional images in our stories. We're going to do some exercises to evoke some images in our own minds. And as Elizabeth often says, you can't give what you don't have. So if you don't have the images in your mind, you can't transmit them to your listeners. And we are going to discuss other techniques for conveying those images besides the words that we have as storytellers. So writers don't have them, but we have them. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I always want to thank everybody that has taught me, and I want to thank Hank for helping me work on this a little. He and I have taught workshops together, so I know a lot of things because of watching Hank. But all the mistakes are mine. Isn't that what they say? All the mistakes are mine. Okay, so why do you want to share images? I always think of that great story, The Cowtail Switch. Some of you may have heard of the story of the Cowtail Switch. It's one of my favorite stories. A hunter goes into the jungle and doesn't come home, and his children go looking for him, and they find his bones because he has been attacked and killed by an animal, and they find his weapons. And they all the sons have a different talent. So one of them can put muscle and sinew on the bones, and one of them can put skin on the bones, and one of them, all of them take those bones and they build up their father back, and then the last one brings him back to life. And we can think of a story that way. The story, as we first find it, is like a skeleton in a way. We're going to take it and we're going to do a bunch of stuff to it, but we have to add the muscle and the skin and all of the things that are going to make that story come alive to our listeners. We want to make the story real. We want the listener to inhabit the story. We want to make the story resonate with the listener by calling on images in their own memory and things that they've experienced. We want them not to just share the story with us, but also care about the story. They won't have the same images, but if they don't have any images, then the story isn't successful. Back in a long time ago, when I was first telling stories, I went to a storytelling festival, which is no longer around. And they had some of the best storytellers. I was so lucky to get to go to that. They had Jay O'Callahan, who's an amazing storyteller. And one of the things he told was a little story. He used to tell stories to his kids, and that's how he started telling stories. A little story called The Red Ball. And you know those little balls that go with a paddle? You know, you've seen those. And he was telling a story about a little girl who had a red ball, and this red ball was very important to her and helped her through a lot of situations in her life. And what I heard, and I don't remember where, was that at one point someone came up after the story and asked to see the red ball. And Jay O'Callahan said, well, there is no red ball. It was in your imagination. And the man said, no, 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 I saw a red ball. And he said, no, it was not there. So that's what I call good storytelling, right? So the other reason that we want to make sure that we evoke images is that images come with emotions. And we relate as the narrator, and all the characters in the story also relate to those images with emotion. You know, a smell can be disgusting or comforting or whatever. So we want to call up the memories by kind of linking them with the emotions that go with those images. We want to create empathy in our listeners. And that to me, sorry, I banged my table. That to me is the huge power of storytelling, is to create empathy by sharing images with our listeners. So a story that resonates is a story that is worth listening to. And as Donna Washington said, and I always like to quote her, we want it to be a we story, not a me story. A story that says, well, this was worth hearing. I really related to that story. And then we can also use images as a way to emphasize the different structural parts of the story. We can use them to create setting and, of course, character. We can also emphasize different parts of the story arc with the images we use, and take the listeners all the way through. And the other reason we use images is to make the story our own. So every time we tell a story, whether we do it consciously or not, we are choosing the most important thing, the MIT, which some people talk about, the most important thing of that story. Why are we telling that story? What does it mean to us? What do we want to convey with that story? So we want to use those images so they can help us convey that most important thing. You're going to be picking and choosing anyway. That's what we do as storytellers. So you kind of want to be intentional about how you do that. Our task then is to image in the entire story so that we have it, we inhabit the story is in us. And then we will then choose which images to share with our listeners and how we're going to share them. So we want to portray the characters and setting and plot. We want to evoke emotion, and we want to serve the audience to whom we're telling. So we might choose different images for different audiences depending on what they really need. Um, so the other part of this is that we have five senses, and we tend to focus on our visual sense. But what we want to do is make sure that we hit the other senses as they are applicable to the story. So you can take your paper and write across the top the five senses. So we can all chime in our minds here. We've got, let's start with not the usual visual. So let's start, for instance, with smell. And taste is really related to smell. So let's put taste, sound, touch, or texture, as some people say. And last, let's put sight. So those five words across the top of your page, because we're going to use those and we need to remember them. It's kind of interesting that we tend to favor certain senses, and that's not just as humanity, but also each of us tend to do that. I had some eye surgery when I was a kid, so I think maybe that's one reason why I don't see things visually as the same way other people seem to see them. So that's not my favorite sense to use. But in Doug Lippman's book, which I'm going to be quoting from this, Improving Your Storytelling, he talks about how you can amplify the senses that you don't normally talk about. And there's a book that I just finished reading called Life in Five Senses by Gretchen Rubin, which also talks about that. So both of those are really interesting books. And I think as you're working on this, you might take Gretchen Rubin's quiz, which is the sense that you least focus on, and then she gives you some ideas of how to amplify that sense. And I will say I have a handout I want to send you afterwards. I didn't want to send it beforehand because I wanted to see what else you might need to be in there. So, and those books are listed on that handout, so you don't have to worry about that. So, as I mentioned before, we have emotional connections to those images, or our narrator and our characters do as we tell the story. So, for instance, clothes can be scratchy or comfortable, or they don't fit well, or, there are a lot of ways that we relate to the sensory images. And so we want to not only say, oh, I smelt this, but you also want to think about what's the reaction to that smell. So, any questions so far? Okay, well, let's get ready and we'll do our first exercise. Now, this is an exercise that I stole. I'm always more willing to take stuff from other people than to come up with it on my own, because I don't think that my ideas are as good as other people's. But I do think this was a great exercise. I went to an online workshop, and it was with Peter Chand, who is a British storyteller. And he did this workshop. I'm looking at my handout here. He did it for the Story Crossroads people. So, and I went ahead and took that workshop virtually. And he talks about a really interesting thing which I apparently is a thing that other people talk about, called a Madeline moment. I don't know if anybody has heard of a Madeline moment, but it comes from Proust, who wrote Remembrance of Times Past. And he has a moment in his book where he has a Madeline, which is a cookie like this, and he eats it with some tea. And all at once, all of these memories come flooding into his mind. All of these sensory memories. He remembers when he was at his aunt's house and having exactly that kind of tea and tasting that kind of cookie and all the smells and tastes and sounds of being there and being that age. He remembers all at once in that moment. So he calls it a Madeline moment, and apparently other people do too, because it was also in another book that I read. So, what I'd like you to do is think about in your own life a Madeline moment that you had, and maybe a sense memory will trigger it, like the smell of something or a song that always takes you back to a certain place and time. But just we'll give people a couple minutes for you to think about what memory would be a Madeline moment for you, something that pulls up the entire experience. It's like it pulls up the whole of it. And then I want you to write down what that moment was and write down some of the things that, what triggered that memory. What do you smell? Do you remember what else? In the way of your other senses, what did you hear? What did you see? All those things. And then we'll have a little talk about that.
Sally, did you want us to focus on smell or all of the
No,
senses
just
used?
whatever sense pulls that memory up. You can kind of go through them and think, what brings up an entire host of memories in my mind? And it could be
Mhm.
many things, but it doesn't have to be a smell. Um, like I said, sometimes, a certain song you remember sitting in the car with your friends in high school, or could be a sound, could be a texture. You remember wearing something that was extremely scratchy or uncomfortable, anything like that. I'd also notice who else, just note down who else was there and how old you were. What time of year was it? Was it in winter or summer? All right. I can't see everyone, but I see some people looking up. So I'm wondering um, if I just pick on somebody, if you would be willing to share your Madeline moment with us and talk a little bit about the
Mm,
senses.
yes.
Michael says, pick me. Okay, we'll start with you.
Um, I went with well, I had two of them, and one was with the census, and the other was with feeling. Um, the one with feeling in touch was the first time I got flannel sheets.
Ah,
And I didn't have them as a child. I had to be an adult where I could afford them. But I remember the warmth and the bed being, firm and having even pillows with that were flannel,
oh,
and just how warm that felt. And the other was this is one that stuck with me forever. I think since I was a little boy, my mom was a member of a church group called the Young Matrons, and they would have meetings and that kind of stuff. But there was this one lady named Ollie Baker, and Miss Baker always smelled so good. She smelled like Taboo perfume. I don't know if they still even have it now. It was back in the old days. It's one of those that you find at the dime stores. One of those probably cheap ones nowadays. But every time I smell it, I remember her, and I remember how pretty she was, and I remember my mom having the meetings, and I remember just all that kind of special stuff. And that memory and her scent has been with me probably about 60 years, if not more.
wow, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
She came to visit, and I bought a bottle,
Oh, that's wonderful.
but I didn't give it to
Yeah.
her because my wife would get jealous.
Yeah, I think that that some of those scents in particular, they just bring back a whole host of things. I think about when I was I don't know, probably 8 or 9. I used to go walking with my dad on the beach because we lived by Lake Michigan and we would take the dog. And there was one year when Lake Michigan had, I don't know what you call it, it was like a die off of alewives, which is a kind of fish. And they were just covering not the entire beach, but the part of the beach closest to the water. And our dog just ran and rolled and ate and just we had to get her out of there and get her home and wash her off. But it just the smell of that really fishy smell reminds me of those walks with my dad. It was a special thing that we had. No, none of my other siblings came with us, and that dog that I love so much, even if she did get into smelly stuff. So, Judy, do you want to share something?
You're on mute, Judy.
You have to unmute.
There you,
Oh, I can't hear you still.
uh, I don't know where your mute button is. Maybe it's down in the right-hand corner. There you go.
At work,
You
I
There you
got it.
are.
forgot,
Got it.
I forgot I had a touch screen. I've got 3 screens and I couldn't get the cursor on the correct one. Sorry about that. My Madeline moment is not quite what you were describing, but I'll tell you what it is anyway. I did get a chance to go to Australia with a bunch of geologists, and there's a region in northwestern Australia called Pilbara, and the rocks there are very old. And one site we visited was like a very ancient limestone. And if we looked hard, we could look into it and see tiny little spheres, maybe 1 to 2 millimeters across. And what those were impact. When something hit the earth back then and melted rock and it flew everywhere, those little droplets fell all over the earth. And I can remember sitting there and thinking, about that time, things were hitting the earth at enormous frequency compared to now. It was like looking back in time and being there just to see these tiny little spheres that were embedded in the limestone.
So you were feeling them with your hands?
Pretty much, it was like a time transport.
Yeah. So both kind of both visual and textural.
Uh, Maybe so. They were kind of hard to see. You just had to have an
Oh, okay.
you had to
So
have
more
an eye
visual.
for them to see them. Yeah.
That's cool. And I think I saw Viveka's got a hand up. I can't always tell.
You're right, Rebecca.
Yes, mine is I guess smell and taste. It's the aroma of the pound cake. It's a pound cake recipe that all the women on my maternal side use. It's a pound of butter, I think 5 or 6 eggs. It makes a huge cake. Uh, it has vanilla and lemon extract in it. And even when I became vegan and wasn't eating any animal products, I would sometimes bake that cake just to have that aroma in the house
Oh,
because
yum.
it reminds me of family gatherings. My maternal aunt Mary was the cook in the family, and oftentimes when we would gather for dinners, it would be, at her house. And so it just reminds me of times when we would get together. When she passed away, that was the end of those type
Oh,
gatherings. And so it just, it's a pleasant memory.
oh, that's great. Isn't everyone hungry? Are you all hungry? I am. I think that sounds delicious.
Hey, Sally,
Oh, delicious.
Hank's hand is up also.
Okay, Hank.
Well, I was thinking about, I guess you could call it sound and smell, really. In 1967, 68, we would have friends that had cars. I wasn't able to drive. I was only 15, but we had some friends that were able to drive. So they would swing by and pick up about 6 or 7 of us in one car, like a Plymouth Valiant, something like that. And all I remember is hard rock blasting, like, Sunshine of Your Love by Cream, something really, really loud. And we loved that. And we had no idea where we were going, by the way. We just drove around. And the music was playing, and I loved it. It just made me feel great. And we were all smoking cigarettes, all of us, in one
Oh,
little car. Most people smoked Marlboro Red. Most people smoked, Camel. I smoked Newport because
oh
it
no,
was
you've lost.
minty and it was healthier. So I knew I was making the right decision. Yeah. Uh, and it was just a wonderful time of freedom,
Oh,
listening
neat.
and smelling and being. And it was something we did every week. So it's that one sensation that reminds me of that ongoing series of events that was always very important to me.
Neat, neat.
So
Yeah.
Sally, when we're thinking of these senses, should we be like describing the senses like it was a pungent smell or it smelled like 15 pigs or that kind of stuff?
Well, I think if you're gonna take it to the next step and start making a story out of it, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, you would use your words, and then we're going to talk about also how you would use the rest of your storytelling tools a little bit more about that. But um
Chisholm's hand is up also.
okay, let's do one more then.
Mine is also car related, but I guess not as I wasn't in a car like with smoking cigarettes. This was during my childhood. And my sense was sound. Growing up, my dad always played the Mamma Mia soundtrack like in the car constantly, constantly. That was my childhood. So whenever I hear it, I just think of being in the car with my dad. Usually this was in the summertime, so like Texas heat, and I went to his workplace at the time when he was in insurance, and to make extra money, I would clean up like his office, and he would pay me, but at the same time on the drive back, we would stop at Dollar Tree and get like king size Baby Ruth bars. And that'd be just a lovely experience. It's something that I take to heart.
Oh yeah, taste, yum. Baby Ruth, man, I remember those from Halloween. Yeah, we never had candy in my house. My mom did not believe it, except at Halloween. So, well, I think these are wonderful. So, wouldn't it be cool if you're able to put your listener into a Madeline type moment in your story? So they're just transported there. Wouldn't that be great? That's something we want to be able to do. So, how do we gather up the images that we're going to pick from to transmit to our listeners? We're going to amass many more sensory images and emotional connected images than we can convey in words. But if we don't have them, then we can't share them. So we want to do as many ways as we can to gather those images. So one of the ways you can do that is to walk through the story just as the narrator, go through kind of like the storyboard of the story, and just put yourself there and say, okay, what do I smell? What do I see? What do I hear? And just work your way through the story. You can do that also as in the character of one of the people in your story, which I find really, really helpful, especially when it comes to creating character. And you could just be the observer as well. So all the things in the story that we can gather images for, setting and the character, and of course the plot, how things progress in the story. We can also see where the important parts are and make sure that we have a clear and good image for that important part, that stress point. And I was reading in Elizabeth's book about how sometimes she will just put in an image to sort of draw the listeners back, like if she's been talking a lot about something else and then she wants them to be with her again, she'll draw them into an image. So what I'd like to do now is play you a little bit of a video, and this is one of my very favorite storytellers in the world, and sadly no longer with us, Jackie Torrance. And what I'd like you to do is watch the first, it's just going to be about 6 minutes of this story. And then just note how she conveys images. I think Jackie Torrance is just one of the most amazing tellers as far as she just strings the images together almost like a necklace, and it's amazing. So hopefully you'll agree with me. I am going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Dean helped me do this earlier. The story is called Two White Horses. This is an old video from Weston Woods. I don't know if those of you who are librarians might remember Weston Woods. They used to do film strips. Speaking of ancient. I am screen sharing. Okay, so how do I make it go? Uh-oh. I hope everybody can see. There should be.
That little, I think you got your mute button on. If you go down by the play button, see the microphone.
Oh, because
Part of daily
okay,
life,
I'm sorry. Let's go back.
as was
Yeah, I put the mute button on because I was trying not to listen to the advertisement that was on first. Sorry. Thank you, Michael.
The story that I'm going to tell you is a mountain tale. It takes place in the days when people depended on horses. They were a part of daily life, as was death. The story's called Two White Horses. Seems like yesterday when it happened. I was just 5 years old, and my daddy had built me a bed in front of the fireplace. And that's where I slept. And that was my favorite place. And my mama used to pile great big heavy quilts on my bed. Those quilts were so heavy that sometimes I couldn't even turn over. And every morning, I would finally turn over and look toward the fireplace. And there was my mama, stirring in a great big pot of grits. And them grits smelled so good. I didn't realize till I was a grown woman that grits didn't have no smell. And I'd say, Mama, Mama, I want to get up. And my mama would say, well, get up, child. And I'd look at the floor. And I'd say, but Mama, that floor is cold. And my mama would say, I'll come and get you. And my mama would come over to my bed. And she'd pull that shawl out from around her and she'd wrap it around me. And then we'd sit down in my mama's rocking chair. And she'd rock, and she'd talk to me. And sometimes she would sing, and sometimes she would brush my hair. But I remember waking up one morning and turning toward the fireplace. And there wasn't no fire in the fireplace. And I said, Mama, Mama. And my papa said, shh, hush, child. But I said, Papa, where's Mama? I want to get up. And my papa lifted me up on his lap. And he said, now, child, old Doc's coming today. And I want you to go out on the porch. And I want you to show him how to get in. I said, but Papa, old Doc knows how to get in the house. And Papa said, now go ahead. And I got to thinking, old Doc used to give me candy. And he'd put his hand in his pocket and he'd take out a piece of candy and it'd be lint on it. But I'd pick that lint off of there and it'd be good candy. And I went out on the porch and I waited on Doc. And it was cold. And after a long time, I saw old Doc's buggy a-coming down the road. And I waved. And old Doc rode up to the gate. And he got down and he tied up that mule. And I was waiting on my candy. But old Doc just walked right on past me and into the house. And I stood there in the cold. And I got kind of lonely. And then I heard something. I heard something in the house. Something I had never heard before. And it sounded like, no, no, no. And I ran into the house And there was my papa standing in the middle of the floor. And my sister Sally was sitting in Mama's chair, rocking. And she was crying. And I had never seen Sally cry before. And I said, Papa, what's wrong? And Papa never said. But I noticed that the bedroom door was open. So I looked in. And I saw old Doc pulling the covers back over Mama. And I said, Doc, is Mama cold? There ain't no fire in the fireplace. I'll bet you Mama's cold. But old Doc just shook his head. And I walked to the bed. And one of Mama's hands was on top of the cover. So I picked it up and I put it to my face. And I said, Mama's not cold. She's nice and warm. Mama, get up. Papa's gonna make a fire in the fireplace. And about that time, Papa picked me up and he carried me into the kitchen and he set me down in the corner in my chair and he said, now you stay there and don't you move. But I said, Papa, why?
Stop. Sorry.
He just closed the door.
All right. I'm going to have to figure out how to get back to this. I'm so sorry.
And he wrote something down and he folded that paper and he handed.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure you all want to hear the rest of that story, and I'm sorry I'm not going to play the whole thing. But there are so many things going on in that story. Can anybody just unmute and share some of the things, some of the images that you got from that story? Maybe Chester or Donna. There we go.
Sandy's
Sandy
hands
has,
up.
Sandy has her hand up. Sandy Perlman has her hand up.
Okay, Sandy.
Yeah.
There. Okay. Well, I mean, everything, her voice as the child, her eyes lit up. I mean, her story was in her, the part that we saw were her fingers, her hands, her whole being was in that story. And so when she talked about Mama with a shawl picking her up and rock, I mean, I just saw it all. I happened to have seen her perform on video that story. I mean, it was just beautifully done. But she wasn't just standing there like an unconcerned person. She was there.
Yeah. Yeah. So we could say the touch, there's the shawl and warm, and I kept thinking of Michael's flannel sheets. And her mom sometimes brushing her hair and rocking her. So there's a lot of touch. Is there any other images? Somebody else had their hand up, you said.
Yeah. Sally, I think that well, I love the story because it was almost as if she was creating the images in front of us. The story really unfolded. And we were excited to see what image she was about to convey, because you could see she was forming it in her mind. You know what I mean? Through the formation of a facial expression, almost like a piece of clay, or movement. And she was really doing a magnificent job at taking all of these gestures and postures and movements and creating the image, preparing us to seeing that image, if that makes any sense. It just unfolded. The story unfolded in front of us, because I think she allowed it to unfold in front of her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think every sense is represented in that 6 minutes. And she does it. Well, of course, she has amazingly expressive hands, and her voice and her face are, but Um, to me, she's an example of how different storytellers convey image. Some, they're wide and expansive and they're up on stage, and some of them, just as Sandy said, from the waist to the top of her head. Chester?
Well, I was kind of curious when she's talking about the grits, the smell of the grits that had no smell, yet that created something in my head, but I can't tell you what it was, but it was an interesting contradiction. So I don't know where that was going, but I found that kind
Yeah.
of interesting.
Yeah, because I do think grits have a smell, but I don't know. But yeah,
I think the smell she was referring to was the smell of breakfast being cooked,
yeah,
and that would include toast and coffee and sausage and everything else that might be,
Okay.
part of breakfast. And I like the way that she used her words to describe the things. For example, when the weight of the quilts, and then you could really imagine what it must be like to be in the bed having the quilts so heavy that you can't roll over and turn over. Uh, I thought that was really good as far as the imagery, as well as you can imagine and see her sitting out on the porch waiting for the doctor and seeing the doctor go past and all. So she put all those images in, which made the story.
right. And I think another thing to think about
And,
is,
and Pam's hand is up too. I'm sorry.
oh, sorry, Pam. I can't see you. So,
It's okay. Can't find the hand signal. Um, I thought when she started out with the fireplace and kept coming back to that,
oh
and
yeah.
then the transition when the fire wasn't there, very
Oh,
to me.
oh yeah, yeah. She is very deliberate.
Yes.
And one of the things, can I tell you what happens in the story? If it's okay, the spoiler, that is that they think her mom is dead, but her mom is not dead. So when she grabs the hand, which to me is a huge image, she puts the hand to her cheek. That was just so, and the hand is warm. So that's like she's foreshadowing
Mhm.
that her mom's going to be okay, but you don't know that at the time. So, and of course, she is telling it from the child's point of view. So she can only know what the child knows. And to me, that adds a whole other dimension to the story. But she's making a whole bunch of choices. And as you said, the contrast between the fire being warm and the fire being gone, and that parallels what's happening with her mom, of course. So
Yeah.
just amazing. And I think she is a real example of showing, not telling. She just manages to show you everything. Um, so um, let's
I do
see.
have a question though, Sally.
Yes.
In this one, obviously, they put in artificial sound. They had the visuals of the birds. They had the
Yeah.
visuals of the.
Yeah.
Wonder why that almost seemed like it's anti the storytelling. So
Yeah. That was a Weston Woods thing. Weston Woods, I don't know, side note. Elizabeth has a great story about how when she and Gail went to New York to be recorded for Weston Woods. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it's
I heard it.
hilarious.
Very cool.
Yeah, so they just didn't trust. I don't think they didn't trust, and I really dislike some of the images they use later in the story. I think they could have left them out, and it would have been perfect. But they stuck them in there.
Sally, Tim's hand is up.
Oh, okay.
Sally, you talked earlier about Elizabeth Ellis using imagery to pull people back in for a particular purpose. And I think that what Jackie did at one point did that, and that was her description of the doctor bringing candy. And he would reach in
Oh,
his pocket and pull out the candy, and it always had lint on it, which is,
Mm.
I've gotten candy from some of my grandparents' friends that had lint on it. So it pulled me right in, and I could think about pulling that lint off so I could pop the candy in my mouth. She is building toward, though you told me otherwise, I was thinking mother was deceased. And I could see very early on that the story seemed to be going in that direction. And she stopped right in my imagining what was going to happen and pulled me right into that moment of getting that piece of candy with the lint on it, which was a very deliberate choice on her part to stop us from thinking ahead and pulling us back into the moment.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And also a tiny bit of humor in there to keep us from, going straight down into the depths. So, yeah, yeah. Um, okay, so I would like us to do, it's a little later than I expected, but we'll just do this one exercise and then we'll take a break. So what we're going to do is we're going to think about a story that you know, and we're going to talk a little bit about setting. So, of course, when you're telling a story, setting the beginning of the story, which is, who is there, where is it, what time period, and you want to get right into the story, but you need to know all the things about that setting and also decide what part of the images from the setting is going to serve where you want the story to go. So, why don't we do this exercise, which is to draw a box on your paper, and it's going to be like a story panel or like storyboard piece or a frame, say in a film of your story, but it's going to be surround, like not just not just visual and sound. It's going to be surround sense. Okay, so what I want you to do is just do a little schematic of the first scene of a story that you tell or a story that you know, and the very first scene, and draw maybe a rough schematic, like is there furniture, or if you're outside is, tree, nothing fancy. And if there's some people in that first scene, just drew a little couple stick figures. And I want you to just open the door into that scene and brainstorm some words about all the things that you sense in that scene. Does that make sense? Is everybody okay with that? Not hearing that you're not, so go at it. Try and be as specific as you can. So, for instance, if there's a table, does it have a tablecloth? What kind of legs does it have? Are they ornate or plain? Um, is it like a scrubbed wood table? Is there a broken part of it? Or is it fancy, shiny? So just, try and get very specific. For instance, if you were the director of a movie and you were going to tell your prop person, I want this chair to look like this, or I want this, since it's a surround sense movie, I want it to smell like these particular smells. So try and be as specific as you possibly can. You also want to think about what's the weather, what's the time of year, what's the season, what's the time of day. Maybe it's a time of year when something is happening, like a holiday, or maybe it's that very early morning. Okay, just so we don't go for too long. I think this is a really good exercise just to brainstorm and just write down what comes to your mind as you go through the senses. And I do like to add the sense of time, because time, season, time of day, to me, that's a whole dimension that really adds to setting. So if you were going to just pick one word to describe that scene, and this exercise has something to do with where the story is going. For instance, if you're thinking about Jack's house where he lives with his mom and he's about to go out and get some magic beans. So you might say that the one word that comes up when you describe that scene is poor. I mean, they're poor. The cupboards are empty. There's nothing to eat. His mom is at wit's end. And the one word would be poor. So thinking about that first scene, if you were going to assign a word or a phrase to that scene, what would you write down what you think what that word or phrase would be? Chester, do you have your hand up from before?
Uh, Chester and Donna's hands are up.
Okay.
Just when you're ready.
Okay. Donna?
Yeah, I thought we were going to share, so I was like,
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me just ask you one more thing, and then we'll get back to it. So I asked you for a word or phrase that would describe the scene, but also what emotion comes up related to that scene in the story. And pick a word or a phrase. For instance, if I were doing Jack and the Beanstalk, I might pick desperate as my emotion. But, I might pick, bored. Jack is looking for adventure. So that depends on how I'm going to tell the story and what emotion I pick related to that scene. But that's also going to inform what you focus on in terms of your images, I think. Those two things. Chester, did you have a question about this?
No, if you just reach a point where you want some information, participation, I'm just ready.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's start, and people can continue writing if they're inspired. Do you want to share?
You talking about me?
Yes.
Oh, well, first I want to tell you, I've been working on a story, and I've been playing with several beginnings, and I think this little exercise just solved that for me. I think it kind of put it in the right direction. So I don't know what else you want me to say, but the one word is problem, and the emotion is risk.
Oh, sounds good to me.
And a lot of the stories I do, I use by growing up on the farm setting because I can remember it. So no matter what I do, I use that, and then I don't have to remember a whole bunch of stuff because I can't remember anything anyway.
Yeah. Although I find it interesting, I was lucky enough to get to take a workshop with Gay Ducey, and she was saying that sometimes when the story is your own, it's actually harder to get across because you know all that stuff. And
Yeah,
sometimes it's hard to get it out. So, but you just have to sort of remember yourself as a character in your own story, kind of.
one of these days you may hear this in a liar's contest somewhere.
Oh, I hope so. Donna.
So as you were talking about some of the things to write down, and then with Jackie's video, I was remembering something from when I was a kid that at first glance, to someone who doesn't know the situation, and in fact, my parents were trying to protect me from the potential of being very scared. And so someone that hears some of the details of this memory might think, oh, that's terrifying. And yet, for me, knowing what was really happening, it was actually a sense of home, a sense of being provided for. And so it has to do with my dad. We lived in Alaska. And when I was a child, in the wintertime, when the men would go out hunting, if you brought something home, you didn't, like around here, you didn't hang it outside to drain all the blood because it would freeze and the meat would be ruined. And so I was probably about 4 years old. And I remember being told, stay out of the bathroom, don't go in there. But when I went in, they had been soaking the meat from either an elk or a caribou that my dad had hunted. And so here's this bathtub full of meat that's red. And one of the really cool images that came to mind was the water was that red that reminds me of Kool-Aid in the summer. So, but it was a sense of being provided for, not a goring of meat and everything. So really for me, the word was more of a sense of curiosity and the smell. Anytime I smell raw meat, I'm immediately taken back to that memory of being so young. And yet my dad was working to provide for us, to put meat on the table.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. Does anybody else I know want to share? I think we could do one more. Okay, so we're gonna take that box and use it later. So we're gonna have a little break now for about 5 minutes. And if you want to work some more in your box, feel free. But we'll be back at my clock says 8:11, so 8:16. If you need to get up and go stretch or whatever.
Sounds good.
My brothers and I were in our 50s and we sat down and we started opening up our gifts really quickly. And then I saw my mother walk around the corner in the kitchen with that pink cup that she's had for over 40 years, and that she sat in the same location of the sofa. And we watched her, knowing how ill she was. And so we all started to slowly open our gifts rather than quickly, symbolically trying to extend Christmas. You know, it's a classic example that I use when I talk about MIT. You know, what you think of
Right,
something,
right,
all of a sudden the entire picture comes in front of you. And that's what I was
right.
thinking. That's
I
what I
was
was
thinking
thinking.
about that because I don't know if you've heard some of the discussion about it's some anniversary of the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice, and apparently there's a place where the guy who plays Darcy does a hand flex, and it's a big emotional thing that people talk about because it conveys that he really wants to hold her hand or something. I don't know. But I just thought, to me, it's sort of almost like if you were the director of that scene, you would focus in on that one thing, that symbol.
Yeah, it was really, really great. Well, it's 8:16.
Oh, thank
And
you. Good.
as we get, I just wanted to mention that Sally will be taking questions at about 10 of 9, something like that. So we'll be able to kind of solidify it and we'll be able to get clarification then. And I appreciate it. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Hank.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so we always have to balance our words and the way we use our words with the pacing of the story. So we need to know when we need to use a lot of description and when we want to get right to what's happening, right? So too much description would slow the story down, but we have all of our other tools. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. I skipped a piece. I'm sorry, go back. Okay, I meant to do that later. So when we're looking at a scene like that, we have to decide which are the most important images and which ones we want to choose and which ones we want people to remember. Like if you went back to someone, a listener later, and asked them what image do they remember from the story, you want them to have an image that they remember, and you kind of want that. Well, everybody hears a story in their own way, so we don't want to force them to know one thing or another, but we want them to have at least a clear image of the story. I think about Valerie told a story in the Fringe Festival, which was a story about her old French teacher. I don't know who else might have seen this, but it was just amazing. And the image that I carried out of that story was when her French teacher was in the resistance in World War II, and she had to set off a bomb. And not only did she have to set it off, but she had to set it before she got on the train. So it was actually a live bomb in the train that was set to go off at a certain time. So the image that I have of that story is that she is sitting there and just hoping that nobody sees that or hears that bomb that she has brought with her, and that she, of course, you hope that she gets off the train in time. So it was just a very, very, very clear image, possibly because it's so tied up with emotion. So, we all have our attitudes towards the images in the story, and the characters have their attitudes, which you're going to convey, and the narrator also has attitudes. So that very tense part of the story must be a very clear image, because our emotion is all tied up in that picture of the woman on the train, worried. I hope that makes sense. But we also have our other tools, besides words, besides the words we choose to, I'm sorry, I just really messed up here. Okay. Yes, so we all have the images that we choose to convey the particular images that we want to get across. And we might convey them through our words. We might convey them through the way we say our words. We might convey them through our gestures, our stance, our expression, our pacing, all the other tools that we have. We must also consider the audience that we're telling to. So if, for instance, you're telling to a bunch of kids and you have a record player in your story, you're either going to have to explain it, or you're going to have to pick another way to convey that so that they can relate to that. So you need to pick the experiences that will relate to the things that they're going to know. All right. So if we were the director of that story and we were setting up that scene, we might pan across that whole box that you just did, that whole scene, but we might also, I don't know who heard what Hank was talking about, but we might focus on one image that's very important in that scene and that conveys what we want to convey. So for instance, in the Jackie Torrance story, I feel like the hand to her cheek was about the most important image to me, because it said so many things, and it was such a strong image. And it combined both touch and just the kind of warmth and touch that you would get from your mother. So if we're the director and we're looking at our box, where will you pan and where will you focus? What specific images would you choose to highlight in your box? You might go back and kind of circle. And if you had a Madeline moment for that scene, what would be the sense that would call the whole scene to life? You can think about that. If you had a Madeline moment for that scene, or for any scene in your story. Okay, so now we have the images, because we've done this. We're not just in this little story frame, but throughout the story, we have gathered all of our images, and we have to decide which ones we're going to use and how we're going to convey them. Partially, I believe that if you have the images in you have almost an organic way of conveying them. If you really are imagining all of the things, you're going to convey them in the way that you perform the story. The way you tell is almost an organic process. So we have, besides the specific words on the page, say for instance, we have our tools of the storyteller. We have what Donald Davis calls languages of storytelling, which are gesture, sound, attitude, response to listener feedback, and words. And this is from his book, Telling Your Own Stories. So starting with the last one, we have words, word choice, metaphor, and simile. And then we have how we say the words, how we use our voice, pacing, tone, pitch, emphasis, differentiation between the narrator and the characters in the story, if you're going to do that. But even if you're not making, we're not actors so much as we might convey a different personality with the way we say the words without actually turning into actors and actresses. Some people are very good at that. Some people, like me, I just need to leave it out because it's not my forte. We can convey things through sound effects if we're good at that. I really liked the way Peter Chan does sound effects. I listened to a couple of his YouTubes. He was the guy whose workshop I got the Madeline moment from. We can use dialogue. So rather than saying he said, so we can actually say it for that person. And then we're being that person the way that Jackie was being that little girl. And it makes it much more immediate. And we can also use combinations of all those things. So for instance, your expression plus the way you say it, or your gesture plus the way you say it, all those things can be combined. We also use our bodies. So we can convey image through stance, how we stand, how we move, the relationship of the characters, and whether we're leaning forward to the audience or standing back. We can use our gaze, for instance. So like if I see something over there and you see me seeing it, then I've conveyed a distance. Or my reaction to anything that I experience in the story. So if I'm smelling the cinnamon rolls or tasting something disgusting or whatever, my reaction will convey that image without having to use a lot of words. And as I said, your emotional reaction to the image adds context and description to that image. So you might be repulsed or intrigued or puzzled, but however you feel about it, you will convey that to your audience. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to go back to that box, and we're just, because we are in online and we can't really do things in person, we can't do a lot with our bodies and all that kind of thing, but we can look at our words. So I'd like you to go back to your box and pick a few words and string them together. And what we're going to do is we're going to avoid cliches. So we want to take words that might not necessarily go together all the time, like, what's a good, dark as night. We want to maybe pick some good juxtapositions or make some phrases out of the words that we've used to describe the things in our box. We want to make sure that we can see an image with those words, and maybe one of the ways to do that is to combine senses in that phrase. So for instance, if I say two different senses, it was like walking through a steamy locker room. I mean, you have the smell of the locker room, you have the steam, so you can combine the words either as a phrase or as a metaphor or as a simile, and just see kind of what you come up with. Try and make them kind of unexpected combinations. Does that make sense? So let's string some words together and see what you come up with. And if anybody wants to share.
I have one. You want me to share it, Sally?
Sure.
His eyes were curiously darting at me at intervals of about 5 to 10 seconds. He was reluctant, but I asked anyway.
That's a good one. Darting eyes. I like that. Yeah, we can try and distill things down. J. O'Callahan is kind of amazing at this. He'll just say a really short phrase and you can see everything. We can also combine senses with emotions. So, for instance, you could say, it was that kind of cool, fresh darkness that makes you wish you could fly above the city and look down at the lights. Anybody else have one? A phrase? Oh, Pam.
It was cold as the Christmas Eve snow falling against the window.
Ah, so we've got the sound of snow against the window, and we have the feeling of cold. Yeah. And Christmas, which of course evokes a whole bunch of stuff right there. Yeah, cool. Yeah, also sometimes your description can tie into the story and can, like in Jackie Torrance's, kind of foreshadow what's going to come. Like, it was sunny and clear, but so cold I had to wear 3 layers. It was a perfect day for getting into trouble, but the wrong clothes to get away fast. So sometimes your description, when we get to character, can convey character. Like if you asked her what was her best quality, she would have said that her shoes always matched her purse. Something like that.
Sally, hand is up.
Okay, let's hear.
You're on mute, Cheyenne.
Sorry about that. I was just gonna say like kind of like what I came up with.
Yeah.
So this is what I was coming up with. The cool, soft mist caressed his fur, urging him towards the highest peak. It's about the story is about a bighorn sheep. That's for context.
Oh, cool. Yes. And we get the fur and we get the mist and he's on his way. That's cool. Yeah. I really like listening. If you know Angela Lloyd, another person that we miss, I love how she juxtaposes her words together. No cliches at all. And I will read you one of the descriptions I wrote down, which is really unusual. It's from Donald Davis. It's from a story called Miss Rosemary, who taught him kindergarten. It says she was a woman of indeterminate age who was absolutely the same size all the way up and down from top to bottom. She could have worn her clothing front in the back, back in the front. She could have worn things sideways if they didn't have sleeves. They would fit any way she put them on. And I just really like the way he describes her. Sometimes, a description like that, I kind of want something else that's more personal, like the reaction of the character in the story to that person. Like she was so big around, I couldn't reach all the way. So you have that touch as well as the visual, but mixing up senses and mixing up emotions and senses, I think makes it more descriptive. So we could go on and do a bunch of things with characters too, because you have to have images for your characters. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we might do if we had time. On my handout, I've copied some questions you might ask yourself about the different characters. You would use a lot of the same image exercises, using all your senses, but also you have a lot that expresses personality about a character. I mean, what is their most obvious trait? Pick a line of dialogue, thinking about that trait. How would they say that line? Carol Birch, who I really admire, and she wrote a book called The Whole Story, which has a lot of these kinds of questions in it. She says the more individuated a character is for us, the more likely it is that we will introduce characters who come to life for our listeners. I love, as I mentioned earlier, telling a story from the perspective of each character. Even if you don't choose to tell it that way in front of an audience, you learn a lot about the character and also about the story. I also really don't like it when somebody has the same witch in every story. So if we can avoid stereotypes, Baba Yaga is not the same witch as the Wicked Witch of the West. They're absolutely two different personalities. So we don't want to make stereotypes. We don't want to have even the same bear in every story. If we tell a lot of stories about bears, if you know your characters, they will be fully fleshed out. And I'll tell you two advantages of that. Janine Beekman tells the Three Billy Goats Gruff, or she did, and I love listening to her tell it. Her troll is the most disgusting troll. I mean, it's picking off nits, it's wiping its nose. It is just gross and disgusting. It is an individual troll. There's no other troll like this troll. And I think what this does is, first of all, it makes this troll a real character that's just gross. And second of all, it makes that story much more suitable for a wider range of people because they can see that this character is fully fleshed out. And it's not the same troll that's in every other Three Billy Goats Gruff that they've ever seen. And it also makes it her troll and not other people's trolls, which is a cool thing too. So if you're looking at a character, do they have a regular phrase they say that evokes them? Do they have a quirk or some idiosyncrasy? Maybe they have false teeth and their teeth always click, or they wear glasses down here like I do. They have something about them that individuates them. If your character were in that same surround sense movie, would they have a song? Like how they give each character their own song in the soundtracks? What kind of song would that be? And a lot of times an image will convey not only what they look like, smell like, sound like, whatever else, but also their personality. So if there's any way we can combine those kinds of descriptive words, that's going to be really, really helpful too. So when you're thinking about character, you're also thinking about things like what are they wearing? Are they comfortable in their clothes? Do their clothes fit them okay? Are their clothes rich or poor? What kind of shoes do they have? They have big hands or small hands? All those things give you more insight into that character. How do they enter a room? Are they confident? Are they assertive? Are they shy and trying to hide behind someone else? Do they dominate the room, or are they someone who is dominated, or they like to observe? Do they speak fast? Do they have a lot of words? Maybe they hardly say any words. All these things that you can use to create images of your characters that are going to show not only in the words you use to describe them, but also in the way you're portraying them with all your other tools. So, like I said, we don't really have a way to practice that, but you can practice it once you decide what your character is and what their personality is and what all the sensory parts of that character. You can portray that character with all of your tools. And I would recommend that you get your friends in your storytelling groups to listen to you tell the story and just think about the images and just say what came through clear and what didn't come through. I remember practicing a story that I tell, which I still tell and I love, and one of my storytelling friends saying, I just can't see the ball. And in this case, I had to go and do a bunch of research, which I did not mention, but I should have, because a lot of times, if it's a folk tale from a different culture or a different time period, you're going to have to do some research so that you can describe things accurately. And so that people who do know stuff you don't know don't get pulled out of the story and say, wait a minute, no, that's totally, they wouldn't have had that back then or whatever. So you want people to stay in your story with you and not pull them out because you have some sort of inaccuracy. And if it's a story from another culture, you have to do your due diligence, do your research, and if you can, talk to people who are from that culture and make sure you're getting things correctly, if that's what you choose to do. Okay, well, I actually am getting to the end. I want to ask if there are any, well, we're going to have questions in a little bit. So I'll just do my conclusion and then we can ask if there's anything people want to talk about. In conclusion, I will say that you will constantly be revising your understanding of your story because you're going to tell it and different things will come up when you tell it. The audience is going to inform your story, just like Donald Davis said. And because of the situation, and because you know the story better, the more you learn it, the more you can understand pieces of it. And of course, as you get older, stories sometimes change in meaning to you because they mean something different than they did when you were 5 years younger. Make sure that you spend the time to do your research and also work on all those images so that you can pull from your store of images to make the best story you possibly can and tell the story that you want to tell. Don't be afraid to put yourself in the story in the sense of you have an attitude towards things and we have to put ourselves in our stories. We are the storyteller after all. So we might as well be intentional about it. Mm-hmm. Make every word serve the story that you want to tell, and not just the words, but also all the physical, vocal characteristics and facial, all the stuff that you put into the story. Make it serve the story as best as you possibly can so it advances the story that you want people to hear. And I will say that you can work on imaging your story anywhere. A lot of times I'm falling asleep and I'm thinking about a story and I'll just put myself in a scene and work through it, or I will be in the car and I will tell the story from the point of view of one of the characters from beginning to end and see what comes up. It's not hard. I mean, it just takes time and you don't have to do it all at once. Sounds like a lot, but I find it really fun. So, questions? Or observations?
Could you repeat what the book was that Carol Meyer wrote?
Carol Birch.
I thought you said Meyer, but Birch.
Carol Birch has a book called The Whole Story. I'm not even sure you can still get it, but it is on that handout that I'm going to ask Michael if I can ask Carol to send you.
Yes.
Yeah, I did a handout. I have it here And I was thinking I would send it to you beforehand. And then I thought, no, let's wait till afterwards. It's just got a little list of the books that I referred to and that workshop that I referred to earlier. And also has a bunch more questions about character, images of character, since we didn't have time to really talk so much about that, and just a little bit of a summary of what we did at the beginning.
Sally, if you send it to me or to Carol, I'll make sure that we send it out to everybody that was here.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments, questions?
I think I see Chester's hand up.
Chester.
Yeah, Sally, I may be asking the impossible here, but doing all of this work and work on your characters, all the other things you've talked about, are there any tricks to just, once you get it resolved, to remembering what you resolved it to? I mean, I'm not sure exactly what I'm asking, but sometimes I do something, I have a great line, a great description, then the next time I tell it, I can't remember what I said before.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any, what are your tricks? I mean, I know they say just really know your story, which I think is the biggest thing at all. But any other tricks? I just appreciate that. By the way, this has been an excellent deal. I really appreciate it tonight.
Oh, good. Well, I think part of it is I don't write down my stories, but everybody has their own way. And yeah, it's happened to me where I've said a great line when I've been in performance and then I can't remember it afterwards. So I guess just pick the parts that you really, really want to be in there and make sure you really learn those, beginnings and endings. And then if you have a great description, but I think part of it is you don't want to memorize, you want to internalize. And that's another thing Carol Birch does really well, which I admire because she does a lot of literary stories. And she says, well, I'm not memorizing the story, I'm learning the story, which is a different thing. So I would say just make sure that you pick the lines that you really love and make sure you've got them. I mean, it doesn't have to be every single word. Does that help?
Yeah. I don't try to remember all of those things. What I try to do though, and hope I get better with it, is like when I come to a workshop like this, I'll go back to a story that I tell, and it's like, okay, where can I enhance that story by now using more descriptive language or using my imagination, or did I fully develop that character? And I think for me, what it does, because I'm not good at writing down stories either, but at least it gets me in the frame of mind that when I'm telling a story, whether it's the first part where I'm telling the setting or if I'm talking about a person, I just keep remembering adjectives and adverbs, describing it, so that somebody gets that picture. So I may not always say he was 6'8", tall as a tree. And maybe the next time I'll say that he's had a long neck like a giraffe. But either way, I'm going to be trying to remember that I've got to make a picture. And the way I make the picture is through the words. How can I make that picture? Like somebody said earlier about meat in the tub, and it looks like Kool-Aid. Or that's another way of saying it was blood in the water. you know.
Yeah.
So to me, I try to keep that thing in mind. Just like before when we had a workshop and Tony was talking about developing Tony or Fran, one was talking about developing characters. That just made me thinking when I tell historical stories or personal stories, don't just tell it like everybody else knows the story and they all know that George Washington looked like this, that, or the other. No, make sure I include that he had that three-corner hat on and he had a wooden leg or whatever, those kinds of things. When I'm more conscious of it, even without writing it down, it seems like it's triggered in my head. So it may not be the same description or the same wording, but the essence of it is still the same. I hope
Right.
that.
And I really do feel like if you know the story, if you have the images, whatever comes out, even if it's not the same great word that you thought of last time, is going to be authentic to your telling of the story. And because you know that character, you know that situation, you know that setting. So but
Sally,
I
Donna
will.
has her hand up. I don't know if you can see it or not.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, one of the things, and maybe this answers Chester's question a little bit too. One of the things that I've been trying to do is, especially, I really liked this last Texas storytelling festival, and one of the ladies that was there, I apologize, I don't remember her name. She's Scottish. She wears the
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So from the previous year, I shared something with her this year that she did that really just impacted me, and it reminded me again. So I go back through the stories that I tell and tried to incorporate more of that sensory, kind of like what you were talking about, Sally. And one of the things she did on the spooky stories was using her voice to convey the wind and that the weather, versus saying the wind was blowing really cold, using that, just that breath and on the microphone. And I feel like those kinds of sensory things help me remember it more. So like when I hear something that I really like from a storyteller, going back through my stories that I tell and seeing where I can insert that to make it more memorable and more full.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
You know,
Yeah, I think.
sometimes,
Oh, sorry.
no, I'm sorry, Sally. I was just going to say that, sometimes I just have somebody record my story, because if I have any good lines or any good words, or if there's anything that I'm soliciting as far as feedback that I want to remember, as Chester was saying, you don't remember all the time. So if it's a really important story, depends on the context, but I'll have somebody record it on my phone just so I have it. And instead of writing out stories, Chester got me thinking about it. I write out, key lines or key words, or maybe a joke that I might include in the story, or something very emotional. And I use all of these and I look at those, and I don't necessarily put them in order, because they can be placed in many different areas, right? So it's sort of like journal writing, but I'll just write out sentences or words, or other additions that I want to include in that story. Sometimes if it's a funny line, I might want to start with it. I might want to end with it. I might want to put it somewhere in the middle during a dialogue. And you have different configurations, but you can do that without writing out the entire story, because that's an obstacle. But just lines and words and recording it.
Yeah, that's a good idea too. Viveka?
Yes, I had a question. Is there such a thing as too much sensory information? And how do you strike that balance? And then I have a follow-on question to that. And is there too much description of a character, or do you only share the description that's essential to the story? Like you gave the example, his teeth clacked, when made a clacking sound when he talked, and maybe that, was something essential to the story. But do I go on to talk about he had wiry hair or whatever when it wasn't essential to the story? So I've probably thrown like two questions into one.
Yeah,
So
I think
hopefully
there
you
can
follow
be
that.
too much description. And you just have to decide what serves the story. I think the most important thing is that you know those things, that you have the images in your mind. But yeah, I think if the teeth clacking, like that's how we knew when he was coming, if that's going to show up later in the story, then it's important. But it's also a pretty quirky thing that people would remember, and I think that would be a fun thing to put if it serves the story. But yeah, I think you have to decide where you want the description to go, where your audience kind of needs it, and where you can convey it in a different way if you wanted to get across. Like Elizabeth in that little paragraph was saying that she just really needed to bring her listeners in by giving them an image, or what Tim was saying about Jackie. So I do think that comes with a lot of practice. I certainly don't feel like I'm great at it, but that's another place where you can have people listen to you and say, this part got a little wordy and I'm not sure I needed to know all that, or this part I really liked knowing exactly this part and this thing and this thing. It really helped me picture that person or understand that person. So it's a balance. It really is. And I admire, I keep saying J.O. Callahan, but if you watch him, he does a lot with very little words sometimes. And he also does a lot with his body that gives you images. I think watching other storytellers is really, really helpful in figuring out what styles work with the stuff you want to do. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yes, it answered the question. I just, as you were talking, I realized a lot of my, earlier in your presentation, I realized that I don't describe my characters a lot. I tend to tell personal stories. And so I don't give a whole lot of description to my characters. So they're kind of flat because I guess I focus more on the activity in the story.
Well, you can still portray them by what they're doing, I mean, we don't have to know exactly everything about them, but
right.
Yeah, just whatever
Okay.
works. But yeah, maybe check with some story listeners that you respect and just say, do I need more about this? Or
Yeah.
I think
I
there's
was
some
just wondering
stuff.
about that. I'm sorry. I was just wondering about that because I realized my characters are pretty flat. However, the added descriptions in many of my stories, I don't know that it necessarily lends anything to the storyline. So that's why I was asking, do you just focus on descriptions of the characters as that description is essential to the story, or do you add description just to help
I,
paint the
I
picture
think
in the room?
I think you answered your own question because if it's not essential, I don't think there's any, the
Yeah,
definition would mean that then it's not needed.
Right.
And
Right. That's what I'm
sometimes you
thinking.
need
right.
details, sometimes you don't. I think my example always is I could say conference room, and everybody comes up with their own image in their own mind about what conference room is. That may be enough. I may not need to tell you that it had big padded chairs and the coffee was brewing and this, that, and the other, because that may not lead to the rest of the story. All I need you to know is conference rooms and keep on going. Uh,
Right.
I think the same thing could be, it was a loving dog. Well, that may be enough to tell you, or maybe I need to tell you he's got short hair, his ears go this way, and his tail does whatever.
Uh,
I think that the story and what you want to convey will determine,
Right.
right. And I
what.
do think the
Gotcha.
emotional reaction to the description and the personality that comes through the description is almost more important than just knowing they have brown hair or whatever. How does
Right.
that relate to their personality and
Yeah.
character and to the
Sally, I wanted to,
Right.
I want to
oh,
make
and
sure that
Tim's
we
got
don't
her
go
hand.
too far over 9 o'clock, but Tim has a question and let's make that the last one if that's okay. And then I want to do a little bit of a preview for next month for Michael, and then we can call in an evening. You guys can hang out and ask questions if you want, but I want to make sure that we are
On
conscientious
time.
and get everybody out around 9 o'clock because they have things to do, I guess. All of us. You have friends, don't you? Okay. Tim?
Tim,
Sally, what I was going to say was I read Carol Birch's book when it first came out, and then I had the luck of going to a workshop with her, and her description of the whole story handbook concept was put yourself in the story and then turn 365 degrees and look at everything and note what you remember. And I've played with that a lot of different times, especially with character. And if you think deeply about a character, you're gonna recognize and perceive so much about a character that you're not going to put into the story, but you will remember it. And going back to what Chester was asking about, the way that you can keep a story that you do tell often very fresh is you've seen that character in your imagination so often. So one time you can describe him accurately one way, and another time you can pick up other character traits and describe him differently. And that way you keep that character fresh when you're telling the story.
I like that. Yeah, I think
It's a great
I
idea.
probably was trying to say the same thing in a different way, but you said it really well. Thank you.
Well, this is Sally. You'll be able to tell by chat how many great comments you receive, and you'll be getting a lot more. This was a very focused, fun, and a very informative session on imagery, and we wanted to thank you very, very much. First
Oh,
of all,
thank you so much.
next month on June 26th, I believe, Michael Grundy will be talking about pacing. You know, a story's flow, overall effect, rhythm, beat, you name it. And it's a really important, a very powerful tool, and we'll be looking forward to that. In the meantime, I wanted to thank everybody for being here. And I don't want anybody just to split right now. I just wanted to make sure that whenever we do these, we kind of are fair to everyone and get us out of here by about 9 o'clock. And it is 9 o'clock. And if you guys want to hang a little bit and talk with each other, great. But I wanted to thank all of you for being here. I wanted to thank Dean Keith, as always, for running technology for us and making our lives so much easier. Thank you. Thank you, Dean, very, very much.
And folks, we always put these out on the YouTube channel too, so you can always go back and see the videos.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. All right.
Thanks,
Yes,
Hank.
thanks,
Well,
everyone.
have a great
Thanks,
evening.
Sally.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much. It was a
Hank.
lot of fun, Sally. Great job.
Okay. And I see some stuff in the chat about getting into class. I don't know if you guys want to look at that, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe for next time.